A swarm of drones darkening the skies over Moscow. Ukraine strikes back as Russia retaliates with fury. Is this a turning point in the conflict or a desperate gamble? This is QuickCasters, your daily dose of news that matters. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you don't miss any future updates. Okay, let's break down what just happened in this unprecedented escalation of drone warfare between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, what we witnessed last night was the most intense exchange of drone attacks since the war began. Ukraine launched dozens of drones into Russian airspace, some reaching as far as Moscow. Imagine that, drones over the Russian capital.
Yeah.
One woman was injured, and Moscow's largest airport had to temporarily shut down.
Wow, that's a direct hit to the heart of Russia. A bold move by Ukraine. How did Russia respond?
Russia hit back hard, firing over 145 drones at Ukrainian cities, setting a new record for drone attacks in this conflict.
Really?
Odessa was one of the primary targets, with reports of casualties and significant damage. This was clearly a show of force by Russia, a demonstration that they can and will retaliate.
So we have a tit-for-tat exchange of drone attacks, both sides targeting symbolic and strategic locations. But what does this really mean for the war? Is this just about optics? Or are we seeing a shift in the balance of power?
It's definitely more than just optics. While Russia has been making some gains on the ground in eastern Ukraine, they're paying a heavy price for every inch of territory.
Okay, let's talk about that price.
Right.
What can you tell us about the Russian casualties?
The numbers are staggering. October was the deadliest month for Russian forces since the war began, with an average of over 1,500 soldiers killed or wounded every single day.
Every single day. Think about the impact on morale, on families back home. That's a devastating loss of life. And it raises the question, how long can Russia keep this up?
That's a crucial question. It's not just about manpower, it's about resources. This level of attrition is taking a heavy toll on Russia, particularly when we look at the economic strain.
So let's talk about the economic impact.
Yeah.
How is this war affecting Russia's ability to keep fighting?
Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the UK's chief of the defense staff, recently revealed that Russia is now dedicating over 40% of its public spending to defense and security. That's more than they're spending on education and healthcare combined.
Wow.
It's a massive burden on their economy.
That's a huge chunk of their budget going towards the war.
Mm.
And while the drones themselves might be relatively cheap compared to missiles, the sheer volume of attacks, combined with the losses on the ground, paints a grim picture of Russia's resources being stretched thin.
Exactly. Russia's increasing reliance on Iranian-made Shahed drones, which are significantly cheaper than traditional missiles, points to this strain.
So the drone war is a cheaper option, but it's still putting enormous pressure on Russia. And this raises another interesting point about the geopolitical dimensions of this conflict. Russia's dependence on Iran for these drones is a sign of their increasing isolation on the world stage.
Absolutely. And it highlights how this war is drawing in other actors and expanding its global reach.
So we have a war of attrition, with both sides digging in and inflicting heavy losses, a growing economic burden on Russia, and the involvement of other countries like Iran. Where does this leave us? What's the outlook for the future of this conflict?
It's a complicated situation with many factors at play. On one hand, Russia is making slow but steady progress in some areas, but at a very high cost. On the other hand, Ukraine continues to receive support from Western allies who are committed to helping them resist the invasion. And we can't forget about the U.S. presidential election coming up. The outcome of that election could significantly impact the level of support Ukraine receives from the West, which could, in turn, influence Russia's strategy.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this war's implications extend far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine. It's a global conflict with the potential to reshape the geopolitical landscape. But amidst all the political maneuvering and military strategies, it's crucial to remember the human cost of this war.
Absolutely. Countless lives have been lost, millions have been displaced from their homes, and entire communities have been shattered. The scale of human suffering is immense.
It's heartbreaking to think about the families torn apart, the dreams shattered, and the future's uncertain. And the use of drones adds another layer of complexity to the ethical and humanitarian considerations surrounding this conflict.
Yeah, the rise of drone warfare raises some challenging questions. One of the biggest concerns is the potential for civilian casualties. Drones are often touted for their precision, but there's always a risk of unintended harm. And in a conflict zone where it can be difficult to distinguish between combatants and civilians, the possibility of collateral damage is a constant threat.
And then there's the question of accountability. When a drone strike goes wrong, who is held responsible. Is it the pilot operating the drone remotely, the military commanders who ordered the strike, or the government that authorized the use of drones in the first place?
It's a complex issue. The chain of command in drone warfare can be quite intricate, making it difficult to assign blame and ensure that those responsible for civilian casualties are held accountable.
And we can't overlook the psychological impact of drone warfare, both for the operators and the people living under the constant threat of these attacks. Imagine the burden on a drone pilot, making life-or-death decisions from thousands of miles away. And imagine the fear and anxiety of living in a community where the buzzing of a drone overhead could signal an imminent attack.
The psychological toll of drone warfare is often overlooked, but it's a significant factor that we need to acknowledge and address. For the people living under constant threat, it creates a climate of terror with long-lasting consequences.
So we're witnessing a shift in warfare with the increasing use of drones. They offer certain advantages, they're cheaper, they can be more precise, but they also raise a whole host of ethical and humanitarian concerns that we need to grapple with.
It's a conversation we need to be having now, as drone technology continues to advance and its use in warfare becomes even more prevalent. We need to consider the implications for international law, for the rules of engagement, and for the protection of civilians.
Now let's shift our focus back to the recent escalation in drone attacks between Russia and Ukraine. You mentioned earlier that Russia has been making some gains on the ground, particularly in eastern Ukraine. Can you elaborate on that? Where are these gains happening, and what's their strategic significance?
The most intense fighting is concentrated in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Russia has been focusing its efforts on capturing key cities like Bakhmut, which has been the site of fierce battles for months. These gains, however, have come at a high cost in terms of Russian casualties. Remember, we talked about the staggering number of soldiers killed or wounded every day. Those losses are taking a toll on Russia's ability to sustain its offensive.
And from what we've discussed, it seems like Russia is facing some serious challenges in maintaining this level of intensity in the conflict, both militarily and economically. Their reliance on Iranian drones, their mounting casualties, and the strain on their economy all point to a growing struggle.
That's right. And as we head into the winter months, these challenges are likely to intensify. The harsh winter conditions could make it more difficult to conduct offensive operations, and the energy crisis in Ukraine, exacerbated by Russian attacks on critical infrastructure, adds another layer of complexity.
So we're approaching a critical juncture in this conflict. The coming winter, the upcoming U.S. presidential election, the ongoing losses on both sides, all of these factors are converging to create a highly volatile and uncertain situation. Is there any end in sight? Is there a path towards peace?
That's the million-dollar question, and unfortunately there's no easy answer. It's a complex situation with many moving parts, and any prediction about the future of this conflict is fraught with uncertainty. But what we can do is try to understand the key factors that will shape the coming months.
And one of those key factors, as you mentioned earlier, is the upcoming U.S. presidential election. The outcome of that election could have a significant impact on the trajectory of this war. Can you delve deeper into that? What the potential scenarios, depending on who wins? How could the election impact the level of support Ukraine receives from the West? And how might that, in turn, influence Russia's strategy?
It's a crucial question and one that's difficult to answer definitively. The U.S. has been Ukraine's most significant supporter in terms of military and financial aid. A change in administration could potentially lead to a shift in policy which could have a ripple effect throughout the conflict.
So while we can't predict the future, we can certainly identify the key factors that will shape the coming months. The winter, the U.S. election, the ongoing battles, the economic pressures, and the global implications of this conflict. All of these elements are intertwined, creating a dynamic and unpredictable situation. And as we watch this conflict unfold, it's essential to remember the human cost, the lives lost, and the families torn apart. Behind the headlines and the strategic analyses, there are real people whose lives have been irrevocably changed by this war.
That's a crucial point. It's easy to get caught up in the geopolitical chess game, but we must never forget the human dimension of this conflict. The suffering, the resilience, the stories of loss and hope. These are the things that truly matter.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that war is not just about territory or power, but about people. Real people with hopes and dreams, fears, families. Their lives are on the line every single day.
And as this war drags on, it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day headlines and the military analysis. But we need to step back and consider the broader context. The historical forces that have led us to this point, the deep-seated grievances that fuel the conflict, and the long-term implications for both Russia and Ukraine and for the world.
You bring up an important point about the historical context. This conflict didn't erupt overnight. It's rooted in a complex web of historical ties, cultural identities, and political ambitions.
Exactly. To truly understand this war, you need to delve into the shared history of Russia and Ukraine. Their intertwined narratives and the points of divergence that have led to this tragic conflict. It's a history marked by both cooperation and conflict, by periods of shared identity and periods of bitter division.
And it's a history that's still being written today. With each drone strike, each battlefield advance, each diplomatic maneuver shaping the future relationship between these two nations.
It's a tragic reality, but understanding that history, acknowledging the complexities and the nuances, is essential if we ever hope to find a path towards peace.
So as we continue to follow this conflict, let's not just focus on the military hardware or the political maneuvering. Let's remember the human stories, the historical context, and the long-term implications of this war. And let's hope that amidst the tragedy and destruction, there's still a glimmer of hope for a peaceful resolution.
That's a sentiment I wholeheartedly share. This war has already exacted a devastating toll, and its consequences will continue to reverberate for years to come. But even in the darkest of times, we must hold on to hope. We must continue to strive for peace, and we must never forget the human cost of conflict.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of QuickCasters. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future updates. And most importantly, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. Until next time.